Hi, welcome to Virtually Sunday. My name is Tony Pichler, Executive Director for Envision Greater Green Bay in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm also co-founder of Whatsoever You Do Incorporated. This week we have a challenging gospel reading from the Gospel according to St. Luke. And I got to imagine some preachers this weekend are going to avoid that one like the plague and maybe move on to some other readings this Sunday or talk about something else entirely. But I got to tell you, St. Luke's Gospel this weekend has some intriguing concepts that I think we could break apart a little bit in our time here together. When I was in college at St. John's University, one of the assigned books that I was asked to read as a theology student was Dietrich Bonhoeffer's The Cost of Discipleship. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a famous German theologian who ultimately gave his life in the concentration camps. But he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. And in the book, basically to sum it up, he said, grace is either cheap or grace is costly. For him, cheap grace was that grace of a person who doesn't truly calls himself or herself a Christian, but doesn't really truly live the lifestyle. Maybe even goes to worship on a Sunday, but then throughout the week doesn't really live the lifestyle of a Christian. Costly grace is grace that we live truly the life of Christ in everything and in every way that we do in our lives. So in Dietrich Bonhoeffer's situation, grace was so costly that it cost him his life as a believer in the concentration camps. That might not be our case, but how is grace costly for us? When I think of the opening lines of this gospel from St. Luke, there's those lines that say from Jesus, unless you hate your brother or sister, your mother, your father, you can't be my disciple. And a lot of people will turn it off right there and then and say, look, that doesn't seem Christ-like to me. The word hate and hating your relatives doesn't seem a loving Christ-like thing to do. A couple things to be said about that. One, I'm always intrigued or questioned the word hate in that regard. I'm always wondering about translation here. Was it truly the word hate as we would understand it? Or in a Mideastern way of looking at things, might that word have been mistranslated a bit? The other way to look at that is Jesus used hyperbole a lot. When he talked about going through the eye of a needle as a camel. I mean, it's hard, but that was hyperbole. He just wanted to kind of wake people up. And a Mideastern first century person would see that completely different than we do. So hyperbole is, I'm guessing, being used here as well. But the ultimate meaning here behind whatever Jesus was saying is that grace, that being a Christian, being a follower of his, is going to cost us something. And it might even cost us a relationship. So I think that's kind of what gets behind the meaning of that first part of the gospel. I love the second part of the gospel where it talks about needing to plan. If you're going to build a tower, you're going to go into battle with an army, you need to plan ahead. I think about when I was growing up in Eau Claire, our family went to Sacred Heart Parish, and Sacred Heart had two towers, two twin steeples. They could be seen really from many parts of the city. And my dad would always say, look, Sacred Heart, when they built this church, they planned ahead. They made two steeples that are the same size. Think about how many churches we pass that only have one tall steeple and one short steeple. They didn't plan ahead. They ran out of money. They had to make the second steeple shorter. I have no idea if that story is really true or not. I'm guessing it's not. But it goes back to that reflection of this gospel. How do we plan a life of Jesus? How do we plan and implement it day after day after day? I love this this quote from a football player on this sports station I listen to often. He says, "You can't just show up today and be tough," which basically means as a football player, you got to practice. You got to live the life day in and day out as you prepare for the game. You can't just show up for the game. How are we practicing our Christianity day in and day out and planning ahead so that we can build that tower? We can go into that battle with all of the resources that are needed. That's what Christianity is all about. The third part of the gospel is probably even more difficult than any of that. And it basically says, unless you give up all of your possessions, you can't be a disciple of Jesus. Unless we divest ourselves of all our possessions, we can't be a follower of Jesus. That's tough. We have stuff. We live in North America, for Pete's sake. We have stuff. It's a difficult reading. But think about this, maybe the simple ways that we can at least get towards that. One way is that for Streetlights Outreach, a program that is sponsored by Whatsoever You Do Incorporated, we have volunteers out on the streets of Green Bay every Wednesday and Thursday from May 1st to November 1st. As we move now into September and October, it gets colder. We are doing a blanket collection for those on the streets who need to stay warm. And so if you have an old blanket or a new blanket, or you want to go out and buy a blanket and donate it to the cause, you can either get it to our House of Hospitality at 1082 Valp Avenue, drop it off on the back porch, or you can bring it to Resurrection Parish and we'll take it from there, or get in touch with us. We'll find a way to get that blanket from you because we'd love to be able to keep the people on the streets of our community warm. Another way is look at your closets. It's fall cleaning time. It's fall cleaning out the closets time. What are some things you don't need anymore? Maybe it's time to get rid of them. Maybe it's time to donate them to St. Vincent de Paul or some other thrift shop that can get that to somebody who needs that. So how can we live more simply that people can simply live? How are we being followers of Jesus in that way? So this week, thinking about costly grace and cheap grace, what are we willing to give up to follow Jesus in our walk this week? Let's do the best we can. The simple ways, the big ways. Let's not live cheap grace. Let's live costly grace. Have a great week, everybody.